Welcome to Accounting High.
If you want to be noticed on any social media platform, the quickest way to get noticed is to make other people feel noticed. So are you going out and commenting on other people's posts, sending them a voice message, letting them know that you see them? Because if not, then why are you expecting people to notice you? It's just goes both ways. And so that's the number one place I tell people to start is you don't even need to worry about your content. Just go out and make other people feel seen. And you'll see that if you're doing it from a genuine place, it's going to come back to you.
May I have your attention, please?
Welcome to Accounting High. It's freshman year at a brand new school. Here, we have no rules in place as we're on a mission to set our own traditions. So hang tight and learn with us as we grow. At Accounting High, you can expect to gain knowledge in a completely different way than what you may be used to, with some fun and oftentimes colorful conversations involving some of the best teachers in the accounting industry. Whether you loved high school or you hated it, here's your chance to be a part of an unforgettable experience redone. While you're here, don't forget to follow us on Spotify or subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you may be listening to us right now so you don't miss out on any new episodes. And feel free to leave us a 5-star review letting us know how the school year is treating you. So sit back, relax, and open your mind because class is in session.
I repeat, may I have your attention, please?
This is another public service announcement brought to you in part
by Accounting High.
The views and events expressed here are
of the next generation of accounting and tech professionals leading this space.
The events and suggestions are not to be taken lightly. Children should not partake in the listening
of this podcast.
Anything else?
Yeah.
So without further ado, introducing the star of our show,
Scotty and Katie Thomas. We are back with a very, very special guest today. Katie Thomas. KT is what I like to write sometimes, but it's really spelled Katie, of Leaders Online. Katie's a 40 under 40 professional and CPA practice advisor, has won multiple times.
Yep, 2 years in a row.
2 years in a row. Katie's almost has 50,000 followers on LinkedIn. She's a thought leader in the accounting space. She's got a strong personal brand with a network of engaged followers. And her content reaches far and wide. I'm reading just some things from your LinkedIn, but I love how you lead with that. The Leaders Online, it's amazing to see I've seen your brand kind of develop over time. I saw your early days on LinkedIn, just by yourself doing videos, with nothing in the background, just like white wall. And over time, it's turned into its own brand. You've got employees. You've got a very, very impressive firm that we could relate to people running accounting firms because this is professional services, what you're doing. And you've built an amazing business. So I don't know where to start. I think I want to start with how you got into it, how I always start, how you got into accounting. And you can go back as far as high school or wherever. But thanks for joining me today.
Hey, I'm super excited to be here, Scott, so thanks for having me. And I'll just back it way up. So as a kid, I was always that person that was starting businesses. When people said, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'm like, oh, I want to run a business. And, that doesn't mean a lot, but I was out hustling as a kid, asking my neighbor, can I do your gardening? Can I pick your weeds on the school bus? I'm selling candy. I was always doing something to earn money. And I loved this realization that I got from actually selling cookie dough. My older sister, whenever we were in grade school, there were these companies that would come to the school and they'd basically say, do you want to sell our stuff? In this case, it was cookie dough. And depending on how much you sell, you can get these cool toys. And it was the day before the order was due for cookie dough for her. And I was like, oh, what toy are you getting? And she's like, oh, I haven't sold any. So I went through our entire phone book at the time of anyone my family knew. And I was like, do you want to buy cookie dough? And so we sold so much cookie dough that we got the top toy. And it was like, wow, if you give people something that they want, then you can be rewarded in exchange. And so fast forward from the cookie selling days, my first W-2 job was in marketing and sales. I did cold calling, and then I did marketing for a small business. And that was like really where I started to learn about like Google Ads, websites, SEO, and I loved marketing. And honestly, I did like cold calling because you got a lot of insight into people's personalities and just how people can be vastly different one from another, to say the least. So it was a great experience. And like I said, I really loved marketing. But whenever it came time to go to college, people are like, well, if you still want to go into business, which I still saw myself doing something in business, they're like, you're pretty good with numbers and math. I always loved math. And they said accounting is the language of business. So I thought, okay, I'll take an accounting class. And honestly, I loved it. I thought it was like a puzzle. And so I decided, okay, I'll get an accounting degree and I'll figure it out. But once you go into accounting as an undergraduate, they're like, well, you might as well get a master's, then you might as well take the exam, and what do you know, you should work so you actually can not just pass your CPA exam, but actually earn those letters. So I did all of that. All along that time, I was like, I like accounting, it makes sense, but I'm not an accountant. Like I don't know. I looked at those partners and I just thought that is not the kind of lifestyle I want. Mm-hmm. And so while I was working at one of the big four firms, I found it so interesting because those above me, like managers, were all saying, oh my gosh, like when I become senior manager and I have to start, building my book of business, that makes me nervous. Or the senior managers, they said that they really, really did not like that additional pressure. And honestly, the partners, a lot of them didn't like the whole marketing or sales aspect of the job. And so I'd always be asking them like, oh, okay, well, how do we retain clients, or, what are you guys doing to expand in the Kansas City marketplace? That's where I was working. I was so interested in this. They're probably like, why is this girl always asking me about this? But I guess I don't know how deep you want me to go.
Well, no. I could stop you there for a minute, because a lot of similarities, a lot of parallels to some of our, like, to myself included, in other guests too, where, somebody that's really, like, these are the unicorns in accounting. You're one of them. Like, people that are in accounting but don't necessarily fit the stereotype and don't fit the mold of a traditional accountant, because we're a little bit more sales driven and marketing driven, and we're seeing opportunities all throughout. I mean, I did the same thing. I used to sell stuff and hustle. Like I still consider myself a hustler in everything I'm doing, and always looking to grow something rather than just be content with where it's at and stable and steady. And that's the typical accountant is, okay, here's where things are at. It's providing a steady income. I'm good. I'll get a new client when I lose one, or I'll do this when I need to, or when somebody comes to me. And we're seeing a broad shift in those mindsets with accounting firm owners today, and especially with a lot of my guests, that this is turning into more of, we're running a business here. We're not just accountants that have clients. We're business owners, and we're entrepreneurs, and we're growing a firm, and we're growing it, in unique ways. And that's why I said your firm right now, it's a marketing agency, right? That's technically, but it's very similar to the way a firm would be structured. That's why a lot of accountants go into that niche, because they're a lot like us, that, marketing and creatives, like the creative agencies, they're very similar to the way it's structured and the way it's run. There's a lot of similarities. So I think we can talk about you running your business too and growing that. But, back to what you were saying about growing, and seeing things from a different eye and a different angle. I think that's so important for our profession, to have people like you involved to learn. For accountants to learn that, it's possible for them too. They may not have that mindset, but there's things that they can do, that they can position themselves as thought leaders. They can position themselves as somebody that can grow their firm rather than just sticking behind and doing the work. And I think, there's ways to transform your mindset and to shift that. But there are other people like us that were just born like this, that were always doing it. So I think, I've weaved in a few things there, but just from the eyes of a traditional accountant, I think there's a lot that they can learn from people like you and from how you've grown your business too. So you started at EY, right?
Yes.
Is that, and you saw it as, I'm not like them. What was the break point that you ended up leaving there, or ended up not sticking with that?
Yeah, so I had just gotten married. I went on a honeymoon, and right before I got married, leading up to it, I got like 2 hours of sleep every night before my wedding because they wanted me to get all this work done before I left. And that was I was about to break at that point. But then I was like, okay, I'm going to get through this and I'm going to have a break. And so I went on my honeymoon and I got back from that.
You almost broke before your break.
Right. And I totally broke. So I ended up in the hospital for 9 days, and I had pancreatitis, which they could never figure out what caused that. Usually it's you're a drug addict or you're abusing alcohol. And thankfully, I was not doing either of those. But I had such high stress from getting no sleep, being overworked. I mean, literally, I just broke. And my body totally shut down. And while I was in the hospital, they were like, yeah, your heart at this point is at risk for stopping. I mean, it was really serious. They could not figure out what was preventing me from getting better. It was really serious. They're talking to my husband about what he wants to do if I go into cardiac arrest, crazy stuff. And here I thought I was just a healthy young adult. And so once I got better, I was like, whoa, my health is not something I can take for granted. And if that actually was the end of my life, not to be dramatic, but if that was, I would be so disappointed that I spent it doing something I didn't love and not taking a chance where I saw opportunity. And so I turned in my 2 weeks almost right after that.
Yeah, it's that drive to, so I don't know really how to articulate it, but I think, I deal with a lot of stress, anxiety, and it's always the things that I can't control. And that's what causes the most of it. That's what gets me the worst. And I feel like being in a position or being in a situation where there's a lot of change happening around you, as well as high pressure in your job. You just got married, you're starting a new life, and the job has not let up on the pressure. Even before you left, it was, they doubled your time just to get caught up, and then there's no end in sight. It's almost like that your body was telling you, this isn't for me. Yeah. This is not sustainable.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting because I'm similar. I deal with anxiety, stress, and it's always it kind of comes and goes, and it's not hey, just leaving that job solved it all. No, I feel there's kind of two sides where you're okay, I'm putting my body under too much. And then sometimes it's okay, this is more of a mind game and I'm playing mental chess. Okay, if this happens, I'm going to do that. Or you're trying to project things that never even end up happening. So leaving that job was a good decision for me. And it got me out of that stress that I was putting on my body. But I definitely still, I don't want to fool anyone and say oh, now there's no stress ever. It's just rainbows and butterflies.
So during this time, at what point did you see LinkedIn and start using it regularly? Were you still at EY?
No, I wasn't. So what's kind of funny looking back on it is I actually went on LinkedIn because I thought no one was on there. And I was like, well, I know how to do traditional marketing like SEO, Google websites, but I always admired people that were on social media. However, I did not want my colleagues to see me. So I was like, I'm going to go on LinkedIn. No one's posting on there. They're not going to see me. And so that's why I picked LinkedIn initially.
Ironically, if you say colleagues, I mean, that's LinkedIn is the professional spot, right? Yeah.
So I picked LinkedIn, and there weren't very many people.
I might have jumped ahead, though. I might have jumped ahead in the story. Is this appropriate timing to pick LinkedIn?
Yeah, so I think that's a good spot. So it's kind of funny again that I was like, okay, well, I left and I was like, I'm going to try to do marketing because I loved marketing. I know about marketing and I know I can speak to CPAs. I understand like what problems they're solving for their clients. And if these big, partners and people at these bigger firms, they don't seem to know a lot about marketing or be super educated on it, I wonder about these smaller firms. And at the time, I had no idea how many smaller firms were out there. But I was like, okay, well, if I've got this idea and I can test it, now I have to figure out how to reach those people. And when you're just getting started, you're like, well, you got to make a decision on like, you have more time than money. And so social media was a great place to start reaching some of these people since I did have more time than to like run ads right then. Or, if I sent out an email blast, I had no one on my email list. So who's going to read it? Myself and my mom. Or blogging. No one's going to read that. I'm literally nobody. And so I started with social media and I picked LinkedIn initially turned out to be a great platform, but for no reason other than I was scared.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a recurring theme that we'll get into too, is you're honest. You're very honest and authentic on LinkedIn. And I think people see that, and that's what, they trust what you're saying, and you build that over time. And I know I'm jumping ahead with that as well, but I think that's a real important part of being on the socials, is being yourself and not presenting yourself as this authority, because you're young and you just got your CPA, you're working, I guess at that point you weren't at EY, but you had no following at all at the beginning, nobody on the email address, nobody reading the blogs. So like, that's what always stopped me from going on the socials and putting myself out there, is I never saw myself as an authority figure, especially in the accounting space. And that's also like what always holds me back, is I'm not as impressive as all these other people on there that are presenting their top down. This is how you should do this. This is what you should do. You're able to do that now with your brand, but in the beginning, what did you even like? What kind of? I know there's a lot of experimentation, but what did you expect or hope to start achieving out of that, I guess, when you started?
So I followed certain people on social media, no one really in our profession, and I always admired their ability to create content. And so I think I personally was interested in creating content, and I just had a drive like, okay, I want to start doing this. This will be fun. This will be interesting. And when I reflect back on my life, I was always the family member who was like creating the family home videos. And so kind of combining those two things, it's like, okay, I had a natural interest in content, which really, really helps. But I definitely was nervous to put myself out there. So what I would do is I was like, okay, I'm interested in creating content. I'm interested in posting. I'm going to create it, and then I'm not going to look at it. Like, I would never rewatch a video. I would I'd press post and just close the computer down, because I was embarrassed and it was scary. And I never wanted people to think like, who does she think she is? She's a nobody, and be made fun of. But the interesting thing is, no one is going to think that's doing that. Like, now how hard it is to take that first step. You would never make fun of someone else doing that. And for people who are like, well, I'm not at that level to take the next step to make content, you are. You just need to be one step ahead of whoever's consuming your content, assuming you're educating them, or if you're entertaining them. There's so many different ways that you can entertain somebody. There's just so many people out there that your message is going to resonate with a lot more people than you can ever even imagine. And so really everyone has something to share, something to say. And I think just remembering that you are unique, you are individual, this action that you can take, you can get confident over time, but you have to just press post. And if that means pressing post and turning your computer off or looking away, just do what you have to do, because it gets so much easier over time.
Yeah. it's so hard to start that snowball, right? Like to
Yeah.
really let it grow. And so when you're creating content early on, what was the content of the content? What was the material, or what was guiding you to, what were you saying in those posts?
Gosh, you're having me really think back. So I tried a variety of content, and my business has definitely evolved over the time. So I was doing like marketing as well as helping them integrate all of their apps. And so a lot of my content would be just going through various parts of the business and like how they can optimize that. So we could look at like, okay, how can you optimize getting in front of new leads? And I would create some content about that. And then I'd talk about how can you optimize capturing those leads, and then how can you optimize the sales aspect, and then onboarding. And so I'd go through the various different, like, I guess, customer
Phases.
journey or client journey. And I created content around that. And then it got so I just really honed in on focusing just on the marketing piece. And so my content naturally gravitated to become more about marketing. And then I would say along the way also just always like would share, hey, kind of dealing with this, or I learned that. And it wasn't necessarily about accounting firms. It was more just like business or personal development. It's just, hey, I'm a human too. And, if you find this lesson helpful, or maybe you can see yourself in this, or I can help you in any way, I like to put out content like that too, because we're all humans here. We're not just robots behind the computer.
Right. And it's important to lead with the human aspect of this stuff. And the content that you can deliver most consistently is the most authentic and true to you. So at what point did you start really taking the veil off and not just talking about, the marketing, and actually start revealing like your inner thoughts and what's going on? Because I know the posts that do the best, and Nicole, who I have a lot of episodes with, I remember when she did the day in the life of a business owner, and she's just talking about the stuff that's going on in her head, the stuff that nobody else sees. And that's the stuff that really resonates with people. At what point did you see the magic in that? Because you do that a lot now, but.
That was actually something I did pretty early on.
Okay.
And I think that's because it was a way for me to connect with people and not feel like I was trying to act like I was above everyone. So just kind of keeping it real and like, here's where I'm at and what's going on. Because I find that that's the most comfortable, is just to be you and be honest. Like acting like I'm someone I'm not, like that's not comfortable. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that that's something that's been enabled me to continue my content journey, is just always keeping that piece of me inside the content. So it's never like, well, I've got to pretend to be somebody else, or I need to show up like this, because that's exhausting. Mm-hmm. And so if you can just be you all along, it's a lot more sustainable.
And so back to like the beginning days, when did you see this as an opportunity for you to start your own business?
So I didn't start creating content until I had my own business.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I didn't create it before. It came after.
So the business first, then the content. So then you as a positioning yourself as the thought leader, did that become the job, or you were also doing everything? Like when you started, it was just you?
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't, honestly, when I first started posting, I didn't necessarily see the actual content. I thought it would eventually maybe bring in business, I hoped. But I created it from a sense of just like, I enjoy creating, and like I wanted to do it since I looked up to other content creators and I thought it was really cool what they were doing. I did it purely from like, this is going to be fun and cool for me to like explore this creative outlet. And so I didn't expect anything in return. That time, their cold email worked really well to get clients, to be honest. And so I had some other things I was doing to get clients, like cold email. And I was doing that and I was creating content. And I think that there was a huge benefit there because I wasn't looking to monetize my content in terms of like get clients from it right away. I wasn't like, some people now they have sponsored content, things like that. And whenever you have to create content for a reason of I need this content to bring me a client today, I think that that can also cause you to create the wrong types of content.
Or also create burnout too, because you're doing it for the wrong reasons.
Right. Totally. Now suddenly this is a to-do on the to-do list. It's not like, oh, I get to create some content.
Yeah. It's not something that you're driving yourself to do. It's like, I got to get this done.
Right.
So let's also frame the conversation and go with some hard numbers, whatever you feel like sharing. Your business now, how many employees, like the head count, what's the revenue, like top line revenue, you can do annual, take home if you care to share that, and your free time. If I guess the free time question, I'm still trying to figure out how to phrase that. I ask everybody this, and I never really get an answer because I'm not specific enough. Do you think would you want more free time, or are you happy with where that's at? I think that's where I'll put it. So
that's it. Now I'm thinking about the free time.
You can start with that one. Yeah.
So, yes, I would like more free time in a sense of to focus on some other things that I have in mind that I want to now focus on in my business, which I don't need to get into that on this podcast episode. So I don't feel like I need more free time in terms of to like go do hobbies. I have a good balance there.
Okay.
But like getting more away from obligations that require me in the business so I can spend that same business time doing other things, I think would be great.
Higher leverage things that you as the owner, as the visionary seat, like that's...
Right. Because that's something it's gotten better, a lot better over I would say the past 12 months. It's been huge. But I know there's a lot of room for improvement. And so I'm trying to say no to certain things that I know are, okay, this is going to be heavily Katie involved. Having that boundary to be like, when you say yes, what's the split versus like, can the team do it?
Mm-hmm. And then let's talk about the team, right? So currently, how many?
Yeah, so we've played around like, okay, do we want like more contractor or do we want more full-time? And what we've landed on, a lot of our work, it actually works out great to have contractors. Mm-hmm. And so it's me and there's, 4 other people that manage social media accounts pretty full-time. And then we have a web developer, but the rest of everything else, we just have partners that are great. So me and 5 other people. So it's really nice, light, and tight. And we have great partners who they can then grow their businesses as well that we rely heavily upon.
Yeah, so you're kind of outsourcing different aspects of it.
Right, but they're always the same people. And so this is like where as a business owner, it's like, okay, does it make more sense to go the W-2 route? But I also really admire, it seems like when I work with people who are also business owners, I connect with them, it seems like. And so I really like the relationships that we've been able to form with the contractors. I love our team. That's not to say I don't love them. But it's just like a different way of running a business.
Well, that's the difference. And we talk about this a lot on Nicole's episodes, is having somebody that's highly ambitious on your team. You feel like, how do you manage somebody that's really ambitious when at some point they may grow out of this and want to do something on their own? You're working with people that already have their own thing, but they are growing. So that may not be an issue for you. Yeah, exactly.
You hit the nail on the head there. And one of our team members, she used to run her own business, and she was like, "Hey, I don't like doing that. I don't want to run my own business. I just want a steady role." And so it was kind of the opposite, where she was like, "I now want an internal." We actually worked with her as a contractor at first, and she was like, "Can I come on full time?" And But on the flip side, there's people that can join your business and they're like, it's really cool what you guys are doing. I'm the one doing, say, all the websites. I might as well have my own website business. And to me, I'm like, you should. You totally should. If you have that desire, I would never want to be like, no, stay with us. It's like, no, why don't you go start your own business? We'll still work together. It's not hurting me.
They're gonna need a client. You could be their first client.
Yeah. And so there's been some of that too, where it's like you can inspire people to, you should go do your own thing.
Yeah, that's dope. And that's also part of, this whole leadership and thought leader, and that influencer is you're inspiring people to do something. So do you ever see that changing? Like, do you ever see yourself phasing out of the content creation? Is that turned into a job?
So there are aspects of it that I find to be more of a job. So if I ever am doing like a brand deal with someone, it's so interesting because I can love the topic, but then whenever I see it on my calendar of like, okay, you've got to film this, I'm like, am I enjoying this? And after I do it, I'm always like, okay, that's fun. It energizes me to create content, but it's still a task and a to-do. So making sure that I keep my content to be fun is really important, and not taking on too much content that is like, okay, you have to do this for somebody else, and definitely not taking on any content that is out of line with my brand. That's something I'm sure you're pitched to on things all the time. It's like, I'm good, pass. Unless I use it, fully believe in it, it's a hard no.
Yeah. Well, there's a difference between a hell yes and questioning if you should take the opportunity or not.
Yeah.
So,
how do you decide with like
question,
content?
yeah.
Do you feel like it's kind of a chore?
Well, that I don't go into email at all.
Right.
I don't really take any inputs, so I don't see any of these opportunities, primarily because I'm not paying attention to it. So usually everything that I'm doing is I wanted to do it in the first place, and I'm reaching out to the potential sponsor, whoever it is, and I thought it was a good idea, and then now I got to sell somebody else on it. So I'm always doing the sales part of it. I'm never really being sold to, because I don't take those inputs. And whenever I get a sense that I'm being sold to, whether it's content online or people reaching out to me, I immediately have that like sensory that turns on, and I can already I already tune it out. Like whenever I sense somebody, and you had a post recently that you said, the difference between reaching out to somebody on socials versus meeting them in person, and how you would introduce yourself or how you would lead the conversation. You don't ever lead with what you're selling. You lead with what are you doing, and commenting on what the other person is doing. I'm starting to even see that signs of that being inauthentic or not authentic when people reach out, especially on LinkedIn and places like that. Anytime somebody reaches out and comments on, I love your podcast, I already have my feelers are up already, because I'm like, well, first, if they talk about my accounting firm, no, I don't even give them the time of day. But if then they talk about the podcast, I'm like, are they being genuine, or do they want something out of me? Like, do they want to be a guest, or do they want to sponsor it in some way? So I don't know. I'm always weary of that stuff. It's a good question, but I don't really know. I don't even know how to answer it, because I've tried to change my whole life around all that stuff too. So.
Yeah. It's a balance to make sure that whatever you're enjoying, whether it's in work or outside your life, that it's never a to-do, and it goes from being, okay, this is a hobby, to now I just have to do it, and trying to figure out, okay, but you have to be consistent, so you've got to have some sort of schedule or repetition in there. But to me, it always comes back to, okay, what do I want in the future? What's my why behind this? And as long as you can return to that, even if it's something like going to the gym, you might not feel like going to the gym, but it's okay, my future self wants to stay healthy and be active. I will be happy after I do this, so I'm going to do it now.
Mm-hmm. And it's very important. There's another post you had of around the time when you had your first child, and you were afraid to go to the pool or something. You were like, are people going to be paying attention? Are they going to be looking at that? I don't know why I remembered that one, but it was like, it was also because I framed it in a different way, like how I always am. Like I always think people are paying attention, and I realize everybody's paying attention to themselves. Nobody gives what I'm doing or what I look like that day or what I'm wearing. Maybe, but not really, like in most cases. I think having that mindset about content too, people aren't criticizing or looking at you and like looking at your videos as much as you are. So like for the accounting professional that is afraid to even get started on anything, like because they don't do any video, they don't do any content, and they don't even see it as a means to an end. They don't even see it as a way to get clients because they don't even poking their head in there and they're not even paying attention to that. What would you say to them, like on either why this is important or maybe, you know, how they should start looking at this?
So it goes so much further than just getting clients. It's way beyond like, hey, let's, add some revenue. It's about attracting new staff that they want to be a part of your firm. And we all know that firms today are struggling to find new talent. It's about becoming more confident in how you speak about your services so you can raise your prices with your existing clients, or maybe so that you can educate them in a simplified way compared to how you've been doing it previously. It could be about building your next step. So maybe you're not even a firm owner. You're a staff and you are wanting to find a new job now or 5 years from now. You're creating a brand that allows you to step into that role that I bet would not be available for you if you didn't put yourself out there. Like, it just opens up the door to so many more opportunities and enables you to just make a way greater impact, reach way more people, whether or not they become your client, than you could otherwise. And so when you kind of flip the script and you're like, okay, this isn't about me, this is about my overall mission, and content can be a mode of how I achieve that mission.
Yeah, I love that you brought up like attracting staff. Again, that's something that that's a huge unlock for a lot of people, is finding new staff and new ways of doing that, innovative ways. We had James Ashford from Go Proposal. I know you probably know Go Proposal because they're pretty big on LinkedIn too, sharing, what they've done and their process for LinkedIn and how that's allowed them. They have the best pipeline for potential employees, and they've had no trouble hiring and attracting talent because that's part of the reason. But the other thing you said about building the confidence, and this is something that me and Ron Baker talked about in his latest episode of, when you're doing content, you become a better, we're talking about podcasts, for example. You become a better listener and you evolve as a person and you grow as a person throughout that process, and it changes you. And I think that's the confidence level that people get from creating content, is they start to see they start to fix the things that matter and not care about the things that don't matter. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I like how you explained that. In my mind, how I've made it make sense before is it's like becoming the teacher. And it's one thing to do something, but if you have to teach it to someone else, you have to understand it at a totally different level. And so content allows you to step into that teacher role, which then when you're like, okay, I've got this, I understand this, I'm confident about it, it really just, makes you more confident.
It's always a false confidence before you start teaching it. You think you know it, but when you try to explain it to somebody and you stumble on your words and you have trouble even selling them on it, you realize I've got more to learn. You see those gaps. That's a huge development phase of anybody, and I'm glad you said that, because that's another thing that we talked about on Ron's episode, was becoming a teacher in the context of, we were talking about Accounting High and our faculty, and that just teaching what makes you become a better student as well. Like, you actually learn something through teaching, is amazing to me. Like, I didn't really see that until I started doing it and started, like, I never really thought I had anything to teach anybody on this show or in the accounting in general. I just have a firm. I just have a lot to learn, and I just want to do something. This wasn't supposed to be a business. This is just a show that I could learn and talk about the things that nobody else is really talking about. At least I don't see. And maybe it'll help me, become a better leader at my firm, or maybe it's just an outlet. Maybe it's just a way to talk to people and meet new people. I didn't know what it was in the beginning, but now I actually find myself in new conversations saying things that I didn't even know I knew, but it's just these conversations that I've had over time allow me to teach it better, and I'm just regurgitating what somebody else said, but I've internalized it. Like, so now, wait a second, now it's me saying it, and I'm putting my own spin on these things. Maybe I do know a thing or two, and I didn't really like give myself any credit for that, and I think that goes with anybody. If they don't think they know enough, try talking to somebody else about what you do, even if it's not recorded. But going back to like the confidence level and building that up, I think it's so hard for a lot of people, especially accountants, because we're used to things just being right. Like when you're an audit, or when you're doing taxes, or when you're doing any kind of accounting, there is a right answer to that. When you're creating content, or when you're presenting anything, you're looking at the million things wrong with it. Like it was so hard for me to release stuff or to do anything because I'm super critical. Like so critical, and I didn't know what's right. I don't know what's going to land with people. Like, how do you get over that phase?
Well, it goes back to your comment you said, like, no one's really looking at you. And this is especially true at the beginning. Whenever you first start creating content, you likely don't have a very big audience. And so that's the time to practice. And I promise you, anything you put out, like, you're going to think it's way worse than anyone else. But you are going to get better. If you say, hey, I want my first video to be as good as my 100th, well, I hope that's not the case, because don't you want to get better? Like, the goal is to improve. And so just being honest that, okay, everyone starts somewhere. We didn't go to school to do this, but you do have knowledge to share. And no, not everyone's already talking about this, because that's a huge roadblock I hear from people a lot. Well, it's already been said. Well, how many times have you spoken to someone and they just said something a little bit different, or they gave tiny different example, or you said, hey, can you further expand upon that? And you're like, oh, I got it this time. Like, you can be that person that everyone listens to and is like, oh, I got it. Like, maybe they did hear it, but your example or your story or your just breakdown of the process, now it actually clicks. And so it goes back to having that why and just knowing, like, it's going to get better. So you really have to start. That's the only way you're going to get better. Confidence comes from doing, not from just not taking action and hoping that you're going to get better. That doesn't work, unfortunately.
Well, I've talked about this too. Like, there's the phases of it's a curve where, and the way I relate it is, in the beginning, we're all at the peak of Mount Stupid, like the false confidence, where we think we know everything. And that's when you enter that phase, it's dangerous, but it's necessary to push through. The people that have that blind confidence that really don't know what they're talking about, they're the ones who actually end up making it further and then do know something, because they can get past that phase of it, like people thinking they don't have anything to offer. But once you get a little bit further than there, all of a sudden you start to learn more, and then you end up in that valley of despair of, oh God, I know nothing. And you start to see everything that you don't know, and start criticizing yourself for that false confidence. But getting past that valley of despair is like, I call it the plateau of peace, or the plateau of purpose, where then you're actually, you know you have more to learn, and you know a thing or two, and it's that delicate balance of being able to be consistent and just sticking to the process. Where do you see yourself in that phase?
So I've broken through the barrier. I got started, but I think that we are always kind of in a rut where it's like we can always get better. Because if you think that
I don't know if it's a rut, but I think I know where you're getting at.
Like, that's a great question, because it's not a rut where you're stuck, but I think whenever you don't feel like you're being challenged to improve and see not flaws, but opportunities, then you get complacent. And staying complacent, at least to me, is really boring. Like, just to do the same thing over and over again and be like, okay, I've got it, I mastered this. That's boring, and you're not being challenged. And so it's, as long as you can break through and then get to the spot where you are looking at it like not tearing yourself down to the point where you won't post again or create more content, but you're like, oh, it can get better like this. Like, that's fun. That's exciting to work towards something greater. And if you do think you're the best, and you're like, okay, I've learned everything, I'm all good to go, then you're going to get left behind, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a difference between being content and also knowing that you could reach for more and continue to grow. And I think that's an important aspect of life, is being grateful and being happy for where you've gotten and where you've gotten yourself, but always having that hunger for more, because without it, then everything becomes boring and you burn yourself out and there's just no point of this. And like, this is what happened to me with my accounting firm. This is why I'm excited again, and I want to grow something again. And it's this accounting high. Like, that's what drives me now, because I hit a point where it was just like, I don't know, I was just bored. And that's when I started to feel the burnout. That's when I started to feel like, what's the point? Like, what's the purpose of all this? So, it's great that you have that in your firm right now. I know we glossed over hard numbers, but we can get back there too. I don't know how much that matters for this conversation, because it's more of just, it doesn't matter where your numbers are. And I think that's important to note too, is there's always room for growth, and there's always different opportunities and different ways to grow individually and professionally. Grow yourself, and you could say spiritually, or just as a person, grow your knowledge base so you become a better leader. And then in turn, you run a better firm or better business, because you're growing along the way. And this is really important for anybody. And that's, creating content and seeing yourself as a leader, because you're not, you can't really lead anybody until you know yourself fully, and you've got places that you can grow. I think the worst leaders or the worst teachers are the ones that think they know everything about a subject, and that don't leave room to learn. And that was something I always feared too, is getting to a point where you think you know it all, and then there's nothing else left to learn. So that's really, it's great that you brought that up. I'm impressed where you've taken this so far. Like, this Leaders Online. So it's leaders-online. Is that the website? Leaders-online.com. What are your aspirations or goals for the business itself?
So this is a really hard question for me to answer. And when people, you work with a business coach, everyone's like, okay, you need this 10-year plan. And I think that is great for a lot of people, but I really struggle, I always have, to put like a hard number down, or this is what we're doing. I can have like a vision in terms of what I want, like my life and my team's life. I can start to envision that. Even that, though, I think changes. But the reason why I struggle with like, okay, this is the number and this is how we're getting there, is because business is just an experiment. And especially marketing. Like, marketing is constantly changing. Like with COVID, we saw massive changes in where people were spending their attention. And so if you create this plan that is based upon something that you see today, I feel like you, one, can really miss opportunities, and two, you actually may hold yourself back. Because if you asked me 5 years ago where I wanted to be today, I would have way underestimated it. And I do believe like in the power of like law of attraction in the sense that like you attract what you put out there, and like you should work towards something. But I think that goals can also be really limiting. Like, hey, let's just pick a number and then let's look at our services and our pricing and we'll back into it. So we'll sell this much to get to there. Like, sure, that works. But what if this opportunity like Accounting High comes along and you could say, okay, well, you know, goals can be flexible, but it's good to have a plan. I guess I'm just like, yeah, goals can be flexible and have a plan. So I don't put too much emphasis on here's where we want to be in 10 years. It's more like, what do I want life to look like in 10 years for myself and everyone else? And hey, this is a way that we could get there, but like, let's leave space for the opportunities and the ideas to come forward. Because if we just keep our head down, okay, we're selling this, it's like stuff changes. And hey, maybe even like what we all want changes. And that's not a good idea. And now we have this plan that we've worked towards, and we've just totally taken this right turn and stuck on our plan when really we should have gone left miles ago.
So this, it reminds me of a couple of people that I've had on the show. Joe, you're in good company. Like Dave Barrett says this a lot about failure, or asked him like, what are some of his biggest mistakes or failures? He doesn't ever see that at all. It's always just opportunity. It creates new opportunity.
Yeah.
If you're going one direction and then you hit a wall, some might see that as failure, but he sees it as, okay, this is great. Now we get to experiment with this and try this. The other person, and this is Jason Statz, who was one of the only people that said they don't have any goals. You know, it's not about the numbers. It's not about and I always linked it to growing his following on the different platforms. Like, what's his next goal? Because he always celebrates hitting certain marks, like hitting 1,000 followers, then hitting 10,000 followers, or hitting 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. And every time he does that, it's like celebration, or he's giving away prizes to the followers and stuff. So I always kind of thought it was about the goals and knocking those goals down along the way, but it's not. It's about the process and enjoying the little things and the time that you're doing it. Like, and that's basically what you said too. Yeah.
And it's like, I just remember like I was like, if I could earn as much money as I was making at EY, I would just be so happy. And then it was like, oh my gosh, if I can earn 6 figures, I'm going to be so happy. And like, you reach milestones and you're like, nothing changes.
Nothing.
So we needed to be talking about like what makes us fulfilled and happy and lets us live a lifestyle that we really want, which is where like your question about, do you feel like you have enough free time comes into play. And it's like, I need to get more free time during my working hours because I love working hard. I like genuinely, I'm just that type of person. I love to work hard, but so I have boundaries though on how much I'm working, but in that time I could get better. And so I think that's a great goal to have. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a different kind of goal too, because it's not about the destination. It just shifts the North Star. And that's an always ever elusive star to follow, because that changes over time too. As your priorities change or as your life situation changes, then you have different needs to fill. I think that's really important to understand too. So for somebody that's thinking of putting themselves out there and, or they're just on the fence to that, what's some, like, and then it's the numbers thing too, right? Like for somebody that doesn't have any followers or anything and they don't know where to start, they're not getting any engagement, how do they stay motivated, or how do they stay charged up by that if this isn't something that's part of their why? If they're just doing so if they are doing it because they think they should, but it's not really part of what drives them, how do they stick with something like that?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think you have to look back to your whole content strategy and not just what you're creating content about, but what you're doing around that content. So if you want to be noticed on any social media platform, the quickest way to get noticed is to make other people feel noticed. So are you going out and like commenting on other people's posts, sending them a voice message, letting them know that you see them? Because if not, then why are you expecting people to notice you? It's just goes both ways. And so that's the number one place I tell people to start is you don't even need to worry about your content. Just go out and make other people feel seen. And you'll see that if you're doing it from a genuine place, it's going to come back to you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the law of attraction too, right? Like that's pulling things back in, and you are what you pay attention to. The more you pay attention to it and the more you recognize that, the better you're going to become too. And the more like those people you pay attention to, you're going to become, because that's what you're paying attention to, and you reflect that.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really important too. And you mentioned earlier something about, before we started recording, dark social. And to me, I think of like dark web, but it's
Like
not
bad.
that. Yeah. It's the word dark. The dark always insinuates something bad, but I think the way I understand it, the way you described it was it's the things that nobody's shining a light on. And I think the way I see it too is also like, for me, it's the listeners of the podcast. Like it's not like YouTube where you see the views and everybody sees that. It's out in the open. It's not like Twitter or LinkedIn where you see the followers, you see the engagement. It's the other numbers that other people don't see, or the other places. So like you can't just look up how many people listen to this episode. I'd have to look up that number and share it. Or, you can't look up how many people saw that because it was shared somewhere else that's not being tracked. So tell us a little bit more about dark social.
Yeah. So this is really important to understand, not just when you're looking at like, oh my gosh, I didn't get enough views on this post, or you're feeling down about your content not performing, whatever that means for you, maybe not bringing you any leads. Over 80% of shares now are done through channels that you can't track. So they're in text messages, they're in Facebook Messenger, Facebook groups, they're in Slack, Discord. They're happening places that we can't track. And this is really important to understand, because if you're putting out content that's good, eventually it's going to get in the hands of who it needs to. I mean, I know I'm sharing stuff constantly in our Slack channel, like, hey, did you see this? And it's like that person whose content I just shared, they're never going to know I shared it with a team member unless my team member goes and comments on it. Or like, hey, I can give you an example. I found out about Tally4 from your podcast, Scott. And I went, after I heard about Tally4, I was like, oh, I'm going to go look them up. So then I go to Google and I Google them. And this is where marketing really gets interesting, because if you just look at the data that's tracking on the website, it's going to be like, oh, Google brought this lead into the website. But really, it was Scott's podcast. And so there's some things you can do to help track dark social efforts. For example, when someone books a demo or schedules an appointment with you, just have an open field form to ask, where'd you hear about us? Don't give them options to choose from, because people are lazy. They'll just click the first one.
Yep.
But it really is important to understand this, because this is how people are getting information today. They're not just going to Google initially. A lot of times Google or Bing, that's kind of like the confirmation, like, okay, let's make sure, let's find more about Tally4. But I heard about them through a channel like Dark Social on a podcast.
Yeah. We are dark social. I love that. I didn't even mean for it to be like that, but that's kind of what, and Anita from LiveFlow, they're one of our boosters or partners here at Accounting High. And she did just that, like has an open forum and asks people where they heard about it, because she knows they may end up hitting a link here or there or somewhere else. But where did they, what was the impact, or what was the place that made the most impact?
Exactly.
And that's where she started to actually see what was working with their marketing, was when they asked the new leads. And so it's so important to just have an open conversation with people too, to see what they're paying attention to. So then you know what to target. Another example was my raps, right? They're not anywhere besides the end of certain episodes, but sometimes I'll share them to people because I can just create a link through Descript. And that's what I'm doing, because I'm afraid to release them. I'm still in that perfectionist mode. I haven't really released anything. I don't have a SoundCloud or anything else, but one of my raps got me a trip to Italy, and that's, because in Expensify, they shared it in their Slack, and the right people saw it, and then they recognized it, knew it, and then I saw them at a conference. It just led to different things, and then I got invited to go to Italy for the Expensicon. So I saw it firsthand. Yeah, that was dope, but it wasn't because it got 70,000 views on YouTube or something else like that. It was darker than that.
Exactly. That's a perfect example. I mean, and it's even like referrals. It's like, hey, I think I just sent someone that wants to talk to you about the podcast.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's another form. Like
we're getting real meta here. We're getting really meta on this, but I like it because it's real life examples. Yeah.
So it's if you can wrap your head around your content is doing way more than you likely see at face value, then hopefully that can encourage you to keep going. And plus, let's say something got 20 views. That's like you presented in front of your high school classroom. Well, I guess it depends how big your classes were, but we had around 20 people.
Might be 20 views, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, then people are upset, or they got 500 views, and you're like, that's a crappy
post or something.
Yeah, and you're like, but you got 500 people saw it. That's a lot of people. So it's kind of reframing what we expect, especially as we start, that, hey, you've got 20 people looking at it. That's great. Now that's going to just continue to increase as you put out more content. You've improved your content because you've practiced, and it's only up from here.
So you've been doing this a while. Do you still prefer LinkedIn over all the other platforms? We'll put the dark stuff aside and talk about, there are 5+ different social platforms now that everybody's paying attention to. How does somebody choose which platform to lead with?
So I personally do prefer LinkedIn just because I've found my people there. Yeah. But if someone's like, where do I go? There's really 2 things to think about. One, what platform supports what kind of content you want to create. So if you're like, I really don't like creating videos, okay, don't go to YouTube. Or if you're like, I more just, I like writing text. It's like, okay, well, if you like text, LinkedIn supports text, Facebook supports text, but Instagram, like, you're going to need some sort of picture or video. So kind of think about, like, what type of content do you think you'd like to create or not create? And that can help you narrow down your platforms that you want to start on. And then the second question is, where do your people hang out? So if you want to work with nail salons, then are they on LinkedIn? Maybe not. Maybe they're on Instagram. So maybe you do need to go to Instagram. Or maybe you want to work with marketing agencies. Those are on LinkedIn. They're on Instagram. So who do you want to reach, and what content do you want to offer? That should help you get a good idea of what platform or set of platforms you can choose from.
Yeah. So that's like the watering holes and hanging out more and meeting more people. Sometimes that's still in person for some industries too, like the
and
trade shows.
There's no reason not to still use in person, conferences, networking events. Those are all great sources for leads, or just to, further enhance your brand.
Yeah. Enhance your brand. So we got a lot of different directions we can go with this. I feel like we're talking about the teacher thing. We're talking about the high school thing. And I have roles for new faculty at Accounting High. I do feel like there's a thing or two that you could teach our listeners as part of your brand. We could continue that conversation another time, but I smell another faculty member at some point here at Accounting High. There's everybody brings something different forward, and everybody has a different thing to lead with. That's how I always approach these episodes, and I try to think about that, or I try to have that in the back of my mind, trying to start being more intentional about what we talk about on the episode. And there's not too many people I see that actually know a thing or two but are still humble about it too. And I see that as you're one of those people. You're somebody that knows they have more to learn just through the conversation of what we've just talked about. And it's rare. That's not something that's common in our industry too, or at least what's been known. So who are the people you pay attention to, or the ones that you follow on the different platforms?
Yeah. So I like to follow people in our industry. Like, I mean, I definitely follow you. I follow Blake and David and Amy, probably a lot of the people that, we're all following. But then I also like to follow people outside of our industry because I think that it's important to not just stay in a little bubble. So I follow like Alex Hermazi. Do you know him?
Nope.
Okay, I follow him. He's a great content creator and he does great marketing. I even like following some people like Grant Cardone that are really outspoken because they might have different viewpoints than me. Or Gary Vee, he creates a lot of great content. So I think it's important to look to people who aren't necessarily just in like the accounting bubble and go out and follow them because they're going to be talking about things that are different, but you'll see similar themes if they're talking about what's going on in the economy, and it kind of goes back to that whole like teacher-student thing. They might share a little bit different perspective that can make you go, this makes me think about something happening in our industry different. Or they'll give you an idea for content, or maybe they'll let you know like, hey, your clients are clearly thinking about this wrong. Look how this person's presenting on this topic. So I follow quite a few people, but I try to just make sure it's a wide variety.
Yeah. There's I'm reading a book from Rick Rubin, who's a record producer. And for me, that's relevant because I'm trying to do all the rap stuff too. But there's a lot of things that he's talking about in that book that echo different, business books too, and professional, like the books that we've talked about in our book reports. So I'm thinking about doing a book report on that. You got a good selection of books there too. Any books in particular that you've read recently that resonated?
So I'm seeing right now the yellow one, Fix This Next, by Mike Michalowicz. That's a great book for anyone to go through, whether you're a firm owner, even if you're a staff listening to this, like the hierarchy of business needs. I love it. I've read it multiple times, and it's just, Mike has a great way of infusing stories into learning that make it enjoyable and very practical.
Very practical. That was my next word. You took that out. That's on my yellow shelf behind me too. I've got most of all of his books. That's a great one. So and that applies directly to any type of business and business owner too. Not just accountants, but
right.
He's got an accounting audience. He's been on our show, but he speaks to entrepreneurs in general. I see Good to Great. That's another one that I've learned through EOS. And again, EOS is the entrepreneur operating system. Could apply to any entrepreneur, but accountants love it because it's a system. We love the systems and things that just fit and things that work. Here's how-tos. We like that too. So.
Yeah, we don't use EOS, but I've read Traction, and I don't know if it'd put me in too much of a box, but I see the value of it.
Yeah. Well, you're afraid of being put into a box?
Yeah. I don't like too much structure. I like routines. I love routines, but like you have to do this and like your rocks and everything. I totally see the value, but for me, I think I rebel a little bit against too much structure.
Okay. Well, I've rebelled with this podcast. This is the first episode that I've ever tried to structure or plan out ahead of time because I'm afraid of the conversation being boxed in. I don't think it deterred or took it away. It's just I had one guiding question or guiding. So throughout, if you're listening, you, the listener, you could see I kept repeating certain things like with the listener in mind and keeping that. So I think the guiding principles of EOS, you could follow those things. You don't have to do it structure. Like I don't ever ask people, give me 5 questions I can ask you, or tell me I like to let this stuff brew over time. I'll meet somebody months later. That's when we do the episode because I've had time to really contextualize the meeting I had with them, learn more about them through that time, pay more attention to what they're doing, on the socials and learn over time. And then that informs the conversation. But having that one guiding, like what's the goal or what's the takeaway? So my goal for this conversation was, why is it important to position yourself as a thought leader to increase your influence, impact, and income? Do you think we have achieved that in this episode?
Yeah, I think we've definitely hit on it. And it's, to summarize, it just goes so much further than you. Whenever you're putting yourself out there and actually becoming a thought leader through your content, through speaking gigs, through whatever modality that you're reaching people in, you're impacting people through, whether they're your clients, they're the students that you're speaking to. So those could be your staff or your audience. It could be your community. And in turn, you're going to increase your influence. So as you continue to do this, you're going to get more and more influence, and which is really important to have, because you know a lot of like, you need to have influence so that you can share this with people. And from that, you're going to get income opportunities, which could be a client. It could be a new job. If you're a staff, it could be you write a book and now you sell this book. It could be a brand partnership. There's so many opportunities, but if you really do this, you're going to increase your impact, influence, and income.
The 3 I's. I love that. So I'm working on this in my head, like this metaphor of talking about it goes so much further than you with your 3 I's, or somewhere along the line, the I and the me, but it being further than you, trying to synthesize all of that into a title of this episode. I don't know where that's going, but by the time we release it, it'll be somewhere. It'll land, hopefully.
I have no doubt you'll figure it out.
Dope. Well, thank you for coming on, Katie. I appreciate it. And don't be a stranger at Accounting High. Hopefully you can come sub or potentially be a faculty here one day. How can our listeners find you more? I know that they should know that you're on LinkedIn, obviously.
Yeah, so I'm Katie Thomas, CPA, on all the platforms: LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok,
Twitter.
barely on there. And then if you want to reach out to me, you can just go to our website, www.leaders-online.com, and you can get in touch with me through there as well.
Dope. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Scott, for having me on. Super fun.